The rifle was still warm. I remember that, standing over it in the dark, my rifle, the one my father gave me, and thinking it was strange that metal held heat that long. 3 hours, maybe 4, since I'd fired it last. The snow had come down hard enough to bury the tracks I'd been following since noon, and somewhere between the tree line and the frozen bend of the Platte, I lost the man I was after. Lost my horse to a gopher hole. Lost what was left of my pride to a February night that had a personal grudge against me. The rifle was warm and I was not. That's where this story starts. Not with her, with me and what I'd become by the time she crossed my path. My name is Lewis Gates, Lou mostly. I was a county deputy for 11 years out of Larimer County, Colorado. Not a lawman you'd sing songs about, just a man who did the work and came home and did it again. I had a wife named Clara who died in '78 from something the doctor called a wasting fever and couldn't do anything about. I had a daughter who was 4 when Clara passed, and who went to live with Clara's sister in Denver, and who I saw maybe 3 times a year when I could stand the city long enough. My daughter's name was June. She had her mother's dark eyes and the habit of tilting her head when she thought you were wrong but wasn't going to say so yet. I missed her in a way that didn't have a sound to it. After Clara, I kept working because work was the only thing that didn't require me to feel anything except competent. I was competent. I could track and I could shoot, and I could sit in a saddle for 14 hours without complaint. The sheriff valued those things and didn't ask about the rest, which suited us both. By the winter of 1884, I was 43 years old. My left knee had been bad since a horse threw me on a rock 2 years prior. I had a small house outside Loveland with a stove that worked intermittently, and a roof I kept meaning to fix. I drank a little more than I used to. Not a drunk, I want to be clear on that, but a man who found the evenings long and whiskey a reasonable solution to long evenings. What I was not, by any honest accounting, was a man anybody was waiting on. The track I'd been following belonged to a fur trapper named Cutter, who had beaten an Arapaho boy half to death near the agency border for reasons that had more to do with his disposition than anything the boy had done. The agent wanted Cutter brought in before the situation lit something larger on fire. That was the job. I lost Cutter in the storm, found a lean-to above a creek and made myself as small and warm as I could and waited to see if the night would kill me or let me try again in the morning. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, I heard the ice. Not cracking, more like singing, the sound ice makes when it's under serious pressure from something moving across it, slow and rhythmic. I came out of the lean-to with the rifle. It was a clear night by then, the storm blown through, and the moon was up and almost full, the kind of winter moon that lights everything blue. The Platte was frozen to maybe 3 inches across most of the bend, and what I saw moving across it was a woman. She was barefoot. I understood that before I understood anything else. The moonlight showed the pale soles of her feet, and I actually thought that can't be right, I'm seeing it wrong. But I wasn't. She was moving slow and deliberate, each step placed with care on the ice, and she was carrying something against her chest. Her coat, what there was of it, a man's wool coat, far too big, soaked black at the hem, was drawn around the thing she carried, and she wasn't making a sound. I stood there and I didn't call out. I don't know why, something told me to be still. She made the shore. When she stepped off the ice and onto the gravel and snow at the bank, she stopped and looked down at her feet for a long moment. Then she looked up and she saw me, and she didn't run. She just stood there with her arms wrapped around whatever was inside that coat, and she looked at me with the most exhausted set of eyes I have ever seen on a living person. She was Lakota, maybe 25, maybe younger, hard to know. Her face was the kind that wouldn't age fast, all cheekbones and steadiness. She was shaking, not trembling, shaking, and her feet on the gravel were dark and wrong-looking, and I knew right then she was hurt. "You need to sit down," I said. She didn't answer. "I've got a fire," I said, "back in the trees, a lean-to." She looked at me a long time. Then she walked toward me, and as she passed she adjusted the coat and I caught a glimpse of what she was carrying, a newborn. Couldn't have been more than a few days old. I put the rifle down. She let me build the fire up and she sat beside it and opened the coat to check the baby. It was alive, small and dark-haired and unbelievably calm about the situation. She looked it over the way a woman looks over something she intends to keep, and then tucked it back close against herself and held her feet out toward the fire. The bottoms of her feet were cut and bleeding in 3 or 4 places and blue at the toes in a way that scared me. I had an old bedroll in my pack. I got it out. "Can I look at your feet?" She watched me for a moment, deciding something. Then she gave a short nod. I did what I could. Cleaned the cuts with the little I had, wrapped the feet in strips from the bedroll, kept the fire going. She didn't say a word and neither did I. The baby slept. Outside, the night was dead still, the kind of cold where even the creek sounds froze up. After a while she said, in English that was better than mine in some ways, "You are a lawman." "Deputy. You are looking for someone." "Yes." "Not us." "No," I said, "not you." She looked at the fire. "They will come before morning." "Who will?" "The men my husband's brother sent." I didn't ask right away. I put a log on and I waited. What she told me in pieces over the next hour, some of it in English, some of it in Lakota that I had to piece together from what little I knew, was this. She had been the wife of a Lakota man named Charging Hawk, who had died 6 months prior. His brother, a man she called by a name I couldn't pronounce, had claimed her and the child as property by the old custom. She had not agreed with this. 3 days ago she had walked out of the camp with the newborn and the coat and nothing else. She had been moving at night and hiding in daylight. She had crossed the Platte because the men tracking her would not expect it in winter. "Where are you going?" I asked. "To my uncle," she said. "His camp is north, 2 days walking." I looked at her feet, wrapped in my bedroll strips, and I didn't say what I was thinking. "Your uncle," I said. "What is his name among people who'd know him?" She said the name. I knew it. Every lawman in the territory knew it. Her uncle was a chief, not a war chief anymore, those days were done, but a man whose name carried weight in a way that actual mountains carry weight. Quiet and old and not to be mistaken for finished. I sat with that for a minute. "All right," I said, "get some sleep, I'll watch." She looked at me again with that assessing look. Then she said, "Your knee is bad." I hadn't mentioned my knee. I hadn't limped that I knew of. "You favor the left side when you feed the fire," she said. "You keep it straight." I didn't say anything. "What is your name?" "Lou Gates." She nodded once, like she was filing it somewhere useful. Then she lay down on the frozen ground with the baby on her chest, and she closed her eyes, and inside of 3 minutes she was asleep. A woman who had crossed a frozen river barefoot in February with a newborn, hunted by men who wanted to drag her back, and she lay down and slept like she'd decided I was safe. I don't know that anything in 11 years of law work had put that kind of trust in me. Not like that, not that clean. I sat by the fire with my rifle across my knees, and I watched the tree line all night. They came at first light, 2 of them on horses picking along the far bank. They hadn't crossed, they were still looking for her track. I could see them through the brush, not well, but enough. She was awake. I don't know when she woke. She was just sitting up when I looked back, watching my face to read what I was seeing. "2," I said quietly. She nodded. "Stay here," I said. I stood up, slow on the bad knee, and I walked down to the bank where they could see me. The 2 men pulled up when they spotted me, both of them white. One had a long rifle, one had a revolver out already, which told me what kind of men they were. "Deputy Sheriff Larimer County," I said. "You boys are across the territory line." "We're looking for a woman," the one with the revolver said. "Lakota. She took something that belongs to us." "Doesn't belong to you," I said. He didn't like that. You seen her. I've seen a free woman and a newborn child, and I've seen that she's under the protection of her uncle, who is a chief whose name I'd think twice before making an enemy of. And I've seen that you're across a territory line that makes you my jurisdiction, not his. I let that sit. Ride back. The one with the long rifle shifted, thinking about it. Ride back, I said again. Or explain to your employer why you're in a federal dispute with a Lakota chief and a county deputy on a morning when you could just go home. They sat there another 10 seconds. Then they turned their horses and rode back into the trees. I stood on the bank until I couldn't hear them anymore. My heart was going hard and my knee was screaming from the cold and the standing, but I stood there until I was certain. When I came back to the lean-to, she was on her feet, the baby in the coat again. You could have shot them, she said. I could have. Why didn't you? Because then I'd have to write a report about it, I said. She looked at me. Then she did something I did not expect. She almost smiled. It wasn't a full smile. The situation didn't call for one, but something moved in her face. An acknowledgement, like she'd checked something against what she'd thought and found it correct. We walked north. She could walk on the wrapped feet, not fast, not far at a stretch. I carried the baby maybe half the time when her arms shook too bad from cold and exhaustion. The baby seemed indifferent to me as a person, which I found reasonable. I was mostly useful as warmth. I didn't talk much. She didn't either. That suited us. When we stopped to rest, she would feed the baby and I would scout back along our trail, and when I came back we'd move again. The sky stayed clear and cold, and the plains north of the river were empty all the way to the horizon. That first afternoon she told me the baby's name. She said it in Lakota. What does that mean? I asked. It means the one who comes in winter, she said, or the one who comes through cold, depending. Depending on what? On what the cold does to him, she said. If it makes him hard and useful, or if it breaks him. I thought about that while I walked. She asked me later, while we were resting in the hollow of a cutbank, the baby asleep between us wrapped in everything we had. You have family. A daughter, I said, in Denver. You see her? Not enough. She looked at the baby. You should see her. I know it. Men who do the work and come home and do it again, she said, and I startled a little at how precisely she'd put it. I hadn't said those words. They forget there are other things. What things? She looked at me. The things that know your worth, she said. The work doesn't know your worth, the work just gets done. I didn't have an answer for that. I looked out at the plains and I turned it over and I still didn't have an answer, but something in my chest shifted when she said it. Like a door I'd left closed for a long time had just been touched. She got sick on the second day. I should have seen it coming, the cold she'd put herself through, the barefoot crossing, 2 days of hard going without real food or rest. She kept moving, but her face went gray, and her eyes took on that flat, faraway look that means a body is running on something other than health. I called a stop in a stand of cottonwoods around midday. She didn't argue, which told me how bad she felt. I built a fire, which I'd been avoiding for fear of the smoke being seen. The risk of cold was worse now. I made her lie down and I took the baby, and I sat there looking at this child that was not mine, and this woman who was sick and a long way from where she needed to be, and I thought about how completely everything that morning had come off its rails. She was shaking, not from cold anymore, the fire was doing its work, from fever. Talk to me, she said after a while. About what? Anything, I want to stay awake. So I talked. I talked about the most ordinary things I could think of: the roof I kept meaning to fix, the stove that worked sometimes, the county road east of Loveland that flooded every spring in the same spot because nobody had ever bothered to fix the drainage. I talked about my daughter June and the way she tilted her head when she thought you were wrong. I talked about Clara a little, which I hadn't done out loud in years. Not the dying, just the alive parts, the way she hummed when she worked. How she'd named our horse after a Greek god she'd read about in a book, which the horse had never lived up to. The woman, I did not yet know her name. She hadn't offered it and I hadn't asked, lay with her eyes half open and listened. She asked one question about June. How old? She'd be 9 now. Almost 10. She was quiet. Then, you should write to her. I do write. Write more, she said. Letters are small, they cost you nothing, she keeps them. She closed her eyes. What is your name? I said. She told me. I will not try to write it here because I will get it wrong, but it had 2 syllables and the emphasis was on the first one. I said it back to her. Almost, she said without opening her eyes. The second part is softer. I tried again. Better, she said. The baby slept on my lap. The fire held. And I sat there in those cottonwoods with the cold plains on all sides, and I thought that I could not remember the last time I had felt, in the most basic physical sense, needed. Useful to someone in the most immediate, direct way a man can be useful. Not writing a report, not filing a warrant, not doing the work that just gets done. Just sitting between something fragile and the cold. It was a strange thing to feel at 43, that small. That necessary. Her fever broke in the night. I know because I stayed awake and felt her forehead every hour the way my mother used to do when I was sick, and at some point before dawn the heat went out of it and she was just sleeping. Normal sleeping. I let myself close my eyes then. When I woke up, light was gray in the cottonwoods and she was sitting up nursing the baby and she looked better. Not well, better. You stayed awake, she said. Mostly. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, I said, and I meant it simply. I didn't dress it up. She looked at me for a moment. Something in her face settled, like a decision made. My uncle's camp is half a day, she said. Can you walk? My knee's fine, I said, which was a partial lie. Can you? Yes. We walked. The camp was in a bend of the river, north-facing, sheltered by a long rise that cut the wind. There were maybe 30 people there, a winter camp, horses in a rope corral. When we came over the rise, 2 men on guard saw us and went still. She called out. I didn't understand what she said, but the tone was clear. I am who I am. This man is with me. Stand easy. They let us through. Her uncle was exactly who his reputation said he was. Old, older than I'd expected, with a face that had been weathered into something beyond weathering, past the point where you could read the age in it anymore. He stood in front of his fire, and he looked at her for a long time, and then he looked at the baby, and some tightness went out of his shoulders that I hadn't noticed was there. She spoke to him, he listened. He glanced at me twice. Then he spoke, and she turned to me. He says you walked 2 days on a bad knee to bring her here, she said. I walked the same direction she was going, I said. She translated. Something moved in the old man's face, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. He spoke again. He says a man who protects what needs protecting and calls it nothing is the only kind of man worth the trouble, she said. I didn't know what to do with that, so I nodded at the old man, and he nodded back, and that was enough. They fed me, let me rest. Someone looked at my knee, and did something with compresses and a poultice that I didn't ask about but which helped considerably. I stayed 3 days. I wasn't planning to, but the snow came back in, a bad one, and going south in it alone on foot seemed less intelligent than waiting it out. She was stronger by the 2nd day. By the 3rd she was back to herself, or close enough, that steadiness in her face, that way of watching things without commenting immediately. The baby was healthy. They'd given him a blanket that was old and soft from use, and he seemed to find this satisfactory. On the morning I was going to leave, she found me while I was checking my gear. I want to give you something, she said. You don't need to. I know I don't need to, she said, with some patience in her voice, like I was being slow about something obvious. She held out a piece of leather, tanned soft, with something worked into it, a pattern I didn't recognize, geometric, careful, a strap for a rifle by the look of it. "My uncle made this," she said. "Before your kind of men were in this country, it was made for a man who protected the camp one winter. One man against 7. She paused. "He says he has been keeping it a long time, looking for a man who earned it." I looked at the strap and then at her. "You told him about the men on the bank," I said. "I told him everything," she said. "He likes the part where you said you didn't shoot them because you'd have to write a report." I took the strap. It was the finest piece of work I'd ever held. "Thank you," I said. "You should go write to your daughter," she said. I almost said yes, I will, the way you say things you intend and don't do. But she was looking at me the way she looked at everything, straight and waiting and requiring honesty, and what I said instead was, "I'll write her from Loveland. Tonight." "Good," she said. She stood there in the cold morning with the baby on her chest and the camp behind her, and she looked at me, and the look had something in it I don't have the right words for. Not love, not the way that word gets used, but something like it in weight. The kind of look that says, "I see what you are, the real thing, and it is good, and I am glad I know it." A woman who had crossed a frozen river barefoot with a newborn, had come through my fire and my watch and my bad knee, and come out the other side. And she looked at me like I was the one who'd been saved. And the strange thing, the true thing I've carried since, is that she wasn't wrong. I found Cutter 3 weeks later holed up in a line camp east of Greeley, brought him in without incident, wrote the report, filed the warrant. Went home to the house outside Loveland, fixed the roof that spring, wrote to June like I said I would that same night from a table near the stove. I wrote her a lot of letters after that. She wrote back. She has her mother's handwriting, same slant. I still have the rifle strap. It's on the Winchester now, worked into the leather of the stock where it wraps the grip. Softest leather I've ever put my hand to. On cold mornings I can feel the workmanship in it just holding the rifle, all those careful lines under my thumb. I never learned what happened after, whether she stayed at her uncle's camp, whether she went somewhere else, whether her husband's brother let things rest or kept pushing. I asked at the agency once, through a man I knew there, and what came back was that the chief's niece was well and the child was well, and the matter of the husband's brother had been resolved in a way that nobody saw fit to explain further. I took that to mean she was all right. I hope she is. I hope she knows, though she probably does, she was not a woman who missed much, that those 3 days in the cold are the 3 days in my life I've thought about most. Not what I did, what she said. The things that know your worth. The work doesn't know your worth, the work just gets done. I think about June when I think about that. I think about writing more letters and fixing the roof, and doing the small things that matter to people who matter to you, instead of always the work that has no memory of you once it's done. I don't know that I'd have thought about it, really thought about it, and changed how I lived, without a woman who crossed a frozen river barefoot and looked at me like I was worth the crossing. That's all. That's the whole of it. My name is Lou Gates. I was a county deputy for 11 years and then 12, and then some years more after that. I had a daughter named June who grew up and had her own family, and who I knew well because I wrote to her and visited and made the time. I had a bad knee that got worse, and then a little better, and then worse again the way knees do. I had a rifle with a strap that was the finest piece of work I ever touched. And for 3 days in the winter of 1884, I sat between a woman and the cold, and she sat between me and the part of myself that had forgotten what I was worth. Outside right now, if I go to the window, the plains are the same plains they were then. Same horizon, same gray light in February, same way the snow comes down when it means it. Somewhere north of the Platte, I like to think there's a fire going. And a woman who crossed a frozen river is warm beside it.